towards durable solutions to forced displacement in Africa. The session was preceded by the 34th Ordinary Session of the Executive Council of the Union. In his opening remark on the 34th Ordinary Session of the Union's Executive Council, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Muhammad, said, "This is to say that the year 2019 is fraught with symbols. We must seize this opportunity to pay tribute to those whose vision and courage enabled us to recover our freedom and dignity. Any commemoration is also an opportunity to take stock of the progress made and identify the obstacles to be overcome. The deepening of the integration process continued to mobilize our energies during the period under the consideration. The progress made regarding the free trade area is particularly encouraging. At the same time, we must ensure that international commitments made by some member states with third party do not contradict the provisions of the free trade area. The attainment of the objectives of the free trade area also implies that we move more rapidly towards the single airport market on the free movement of persons and the African passport. On the other hand, we must act more effectively on conflicts and crisis whose outbreak or persistence is the primary cause of forced displacement of persons. The objective of our leaders to rid the continent of the scourge of armed conflict by 2020 is certainly ambitious, but its realization is not impossible if there is political will. The recent developments in the Horn of Africa are an eloquent illustration. In this regard, I would like to hail once again the vision of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and other leaders of the region.
La vision qui anime le Premier ministre Abiy Ahmed d'Éthiopie et d'autres dirigeants de la région.
In this context, the recent signing of a peace agreement between the government and the armed groups in the Central African Republic is a positive step for this country and its long-suffering people. The evolution of the situation seems equally encouraging in South Sudan. It is hoped that the parties will live up to the expectations raised to end the tragedy they have inflicted on their people. I welcome the reactivation under the auspices of the United Nations of the process of finding a solution to the Western Sahara conflict. The African Union will provide renewed support to these efforts through the African mechanism established at the Nakata Summit. Commissioner for Economic Affairs of African Union, Professor Victor Hansen, in his opening remark on the launching event of the 2019 African Economic Outlook held at the African Union headquarters on the sideline of the 32nd Ordinary Session of the Union, pointed out that the time for economic transformation and diversification is coming for Africa.
The time for economic transformation and diversification is coming for Africa. This will enable to achieve a triple objective. 1. Generate value added to our raw materials. 2. Create productive jobs in industry and agriculture. 3. Support the implementation of the African continental free trade area.
On the event, Ethiopian Minister of Finance and Economic Cooperation Ahmed Shide, for his part, said despite the broad-based economic growth and sustained reduction in poverty that the country witnessed over the past decade and a half, Ethiopia has not been able to create adequate job opportunities for the youth. However, he stressed that job creation is the primary policy objective of Prime Minister Dr. Abiy's government.
Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed administration has affirmed to the public that job creation will be a primary policy objective of the government in addition to deepening of democratization. The country will prioritize its spending to target activities and sectors while large group of youth populations will benefit from jobs, employment opportunities.
The minister underscored that the government of Ethiopia is working to integrate the drive to create more jobs from development irrigation, aiming at an advancing agro-industry. Ahmed stressed the commitment of his country to enhance regional integration in the Horn of Africa.
Ethiopia has signed and approved the African Continental Free Trade Agreement as part of an effort to enhance regional integration and the value chains development, as well as to attract more FDI. We have also eased visa requirement to foster closer cooperation and regional integration. We already have concrete cases of regional integration and better collaboration with our immediate neighbors in areas of trade, energy, connectivity, transport linkage, and the water supply.
He accentuated that the peaceful relation with Eritrea will open new opportunities.
The peaceful relations with Eritrea are expected to open new opportunities, including more trade, sharing of joint infrastructure services and development, as well as people-to-people relations and tourism development, which will enable both countries to develop together.
According to him, Ethiopia has developed a lot of joint infrastructures with most of its neighboring countries. Attending the opening ceremony of the 32nd Ordinary Session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of African Union, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said strong wind of hope is blowing across the African continent. The African Union's effort to silence gun by 2020 is gaining ground. The Secretary General hailed the leadership of Ethiopian Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed, normalizing the relationship between Ethiopia and its neighbor Eritrea.
On peace and security, strong winds of hope are blowing across the African continent. The African Union's efforts to silence the guns by 2020 are gaining ground, and the UN surge in diplomacy for peace is producing results, and the fruits of our strategic partnership are indeed making a difference. Ethiopia and Eritrea have shown the way, and I pay tribute to the extraordinary courage, wisdom, and leadership of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. In the Central African Republic, the signing of a peace agreement this week, mediated by the African Union with the support of the UN, is an important step on the long path to ending bloodshed. In South Sudan, the agreement facilitated by IGAD between the parties to the conflict has revitalized chances for peace. And in Libya, the ceasefire in and around Tripoli, brokered by the United Nations, is still holding, despite all difficulties.
He said the remarkable progress in conflict resolution shows the commitment of the African Union and United Nations. Guterres reiterated that the African Union and United Nations will increase their mutual support to peace operation in Africa. He said that climate change is an existential threat, particularly in Africa, so more ambition and innovation is needed to tackle the problem, the Secretary General stressed.
Climate change is an existential threat, and particularly here in Africa, which has least responsibility for the crisis, but will shoulder some of the heaviest burden. Global emissions continue to rise, and the essential target of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees is becoming ever more elusive. We need more ambition on mitigation, on adaptation, on finance, and on innovation. And I will convene a climate summit in New York in September to spur action by political leaders, the business community, and civil society. And this includes mobilizing the $100 billion a year for climate action that were pledged by the developed world.
During the opening ceremony of the 32nd Ordinary Session of the African Union, the then chairperson of the African Union, Paul Kagame, in his remark revealed that the main objective of the Union was to continue build a stronger and marketable African Union. He said the 55 member states of the Union have contributed $89 million to the relaunched Peace Fund. Paul Kagame stressed that healthy and effective organization is required to fulfill political objectives. He hopes that the newly elected chairperson of the Union, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, will take the Union to greater heights.
What remains is to pass the baton to the next chairperson of the Union, none other than my friend and brother, His Excellency Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt. With our full and unqualified support, there is no doubt that he will take our union forward decisively to new and greater heights.
Kagame has handed over his chairmanship to Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, president of Egypt. Thanking Paul Kagame, the newly elected chairperson called on the member states to embark cooperatively on consolidating their gained achievements. He also called upon African countries to work together in order to revitalize continental policy of post-conflict reconstruction and development. Al-Sisi emphasized that the work of the African countries in improving peace should be sustained. He underlined that the counter-terrorism and identification of those who support and finance them is significant to uproot it.
Terrorism remains this cancer that affects African nations and attacks their structures and steals the dreams of their peoples. Counter-terrorism requires the identification of those who support and finance terrorism and combat them collectively. And while we are aware of the difficulty and complexity of this struggle, this remains the only appropriate way to uproot terrorism and eradicate it, along with getting rid of the poisons of extremism that give rise to terrorism and strengthening institutions of protective national states.
Al-Sisi reiterated the importance of enhancing the efforts of regional economic integration in Africa, fast-tracking of the establishment of African Continental Free Trade Area, and providing more job opportunities for youth. During the press conference he held after the closing ceremony of the African Union Summit of 2019, the newly elected chairperson of the African Union, who is also president of the Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, noted that the continuation of the work is in order to implement more continental integration, peace and security throughout the Africa will be the focal area of African leaders. He said African continent is still facing a number of political, security and economic challenges. This requires from African countries to pool their efforts and endeavors, al-Sisi stressed. The chairperson emphasized the need to work on peace and security as per the initiative of silencing guns by 2020 in Africa, expressing that the assembly had deliberated on situation of African countries like Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Chad and other parts of the continent. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said the leaders have reiterated their agreement to the principle of African solution to African problems. He raised the reconciliation between Ethiopia and Eritrea as concrete example.
Leaders have reiterated their agreement to the principle of African solutions to African problems, which led to positive results. And one of the recent results is the reconciliations between the neighbors, Eritrea and Ethiopia, and also the rekindling of hope in South Sudan.
According to al-Sisi, the leaders had reiterated to continue enhancing good governance in Africa and fight against corruption and instability. The chairperson underlined that Africa will sustain its support to Libya in fighting against terrorism, adding African Union will give due emphasis to investment in education, science and technology. Climate change is also the issue that needs more attention. He reiterated the importance to speak in one voice in international arena. During the gala dinner offered to the delegates of African Union in Finfinne, Ethiopia's capital, chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mohammed, commended Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, for his visionary leadership in initiating the fundamental progress observed in the Horn of Africa. He also applauded the support that the Prime Minister demonstrated to the African Union vision of prosperous and integrated Africa.
Within weeks of becoming Prime Minister, his government relaxed visa requirements for all Africans and ratified two key instruments, the Maputo Protocol on the Rights of Women and the Agreement on the African Continental Free Trade Area.
On the occasion, Ethiopian Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed has reaffirmed Ethiopia's commitment in helping drive Africa's common goal.
I would like to emphasize that Ethiopia is ever more committed in helping drive our common agenda at all levels. Our homegrown philosophy, Maddamar, reaffirms our dedication to the Pan-African vision of a prosperous, purposeful and peaceful continent.
The Premier emphasized that the new philosophy, Maddamar or synergy, is beyond coming together, champions joining force for a common goal.
Maddamar is far more than just coming together, building on and taking the principle of synergy further. Madamar champions joining force for a common goal of activating a vibrant multi-party democracy and relentlessly striving for an inclusive and equitable national economy.
The new philosophy is not confined to the matters at home. Rather, it is all about peace, development, and regional integration in the continent.
Madamar is not confined to matters at home. Madamar is also about advancing the building blocks of peace, development, and integration in our own African sub-region and Africa at large. At the heart of Madamar is facilitating economic and social fulfillment through the free movement of people and continent-wide market that brings us together to unleash our great potential for collective